A report released by Comptroller Tom DiNapoli yesterday once again called into question the viability of the state's myriad industrial development agencies and took them to task for their failure to reveal how they spend state money and prove they are creating jobs. Now, this is not a new topic. In fact, the Comptroller has put out similar reports over the past few years. And my next guest spent much of his time in the state legislature trying to reform state authorities like IDAs. He is former Westchester Assemblyman and Democratic candidate for Attorney General, Richard Brodsky. Assemblyman, thanks for your time.
Nice to be back with you.
So let's talk a little bit about this Comptroller report. We also want to get to the authority's budget office's most recent report as well. But industrial development agencies, many claim they're facilitating job creation for municipalities around the state, but oftentimes they are not doing that.
Well, that's the fact. The theory was that these state authorities would be created and operate locally in a county, in a town, in a city, and would essentially give subsidies to large corporations. Those corporations would take those subsidies, and the theory was create jobs. Well, it never really happened. In many cases, the jobs just never materialized. In some cases, it was even worse than that. Jobs were actually lost. So you have literally hundreds of millions of dollars, tax dollars, that are put in the hands of private persons, and nothing good for the public happens. And it's not just the the IDAs, it's to some extent state authorities, it's to some extent what are called local development corporations. Put it all together at a time when state government is downsizing, where state government number of employees is down, where state debt issuance is down. These local authorities and LDCs have mushroomed and are substituting for these same policies that didn't work on a state level. They're doing them locally, and it's not good for anybody.
Now, is part of the problem here that there's a lack of local oversight as well on some of these IDAs and LDCs? Do local officials need more education or more understanding of how these things work?
Well, yes and no. They're set up to be independent of elected officials. And what's actually happened is mayors and county executives and supervisors tend to run them, and the legislative bodies, the county legislature or the city council, tend to know nothing about it. What that is a violation of the traditional American policy of separation of powers. One of the reasons we can control state spending to the extent we do is that when the governor proposes something, the legislature scrutinizes it out in public. That doesn't happen with IDAs and LDCs. The net result is you get bizarre results. Take, for example, the building of Yankee Stadium. $4 billion tax dollars. That money was never run through a budget by this New York City. It was never approved by the elected officials. The IDA, 12 people no one's ever heard of, approved the issuance of that debt. If we're really going to get debt under control, and it's not just going to be a political slogan, we've got to go to the places that issue the debt. And those are LDCs, and it's done in the name of economic development, and it just doesn't work.
Now, what about, though, some of these organizations? There's one in Saratoga County, the Saratoga County IDA, which accounted for a number of these tax subsidies, went to Global Foundries, a chip manufacturing plant that's being built in the town of Malta. And they say they're actually creating jobs. It's one thing that Saratoga County officials hope is going to be the big job creator for that area. In fact, create a lot of spin-off jobs as well. Is there some public benefit to these tax breaks and tax subsidies?
Well, we don't know yet what will happen in Saratoga. I think they're telling us what they plan to do. The problem here is by the time the money is received by the private corporation and the jobs aren't created, there's been no way to get that back. What Tom DiNapoli is suggesting, among other things, is called a clawback provision, so that when the money does not result in new jobs, we go and get the money back. There may be, and I'm sure there are, individual examples of these sorts of subsidies that have created jobs. When you judge the system as a whole, which is what Tom did, it does not create jobs. The expenditures are way out of whack with any public benefit. And in the end, what we've done is it's socialism. The same people in the business community who howl when it's socialism in healthcare love the notion that the public treasury is being used to support their activities. Well, we can't have it both ways. In a time of scarcity, if we're going to watch public dollars, we have to watch them whatever their uses are, and especially when their uses do not provide a concomitant public benefit. Down in New York City, you have a young Bronx Borough President, Ruben Diaz Jr., who has insisted that before there are any of these corporate aid programs, that they guarantee that the jobs will be provided, and not just minimum wage jobs, well-paying jobs that people can support their families on. That courageous stance has not been replicated around the rest of the state, and it's another example of why this entire system has to be junked. Just like we had to throw out the Empire Zone system.
Sure.
We've got to throw this system out the door and recast it. Government should be a partner in the creation of jobs and economic growth.
Okay.
This program is a giveaway.
Just 1 second, though. I mean, you mentioned Yankee Stadium and Ruben Diaz Jr. down in the Bronx, but what about, how do you convince some upstate residents who, where it is very difficult to create jobs there, where businesses are fleeing, they're pointing to the tax cap as being a savior for this, but how do you convince some upstate officials and upstate residents who say, yeah, we need jobs in this area and we need the tax breaks to come along for some of these businesses in order to do that? I mean, it seems like it's kind of...
Well, the first thing you do is do what Tom DiNapoli did, tell the truth. The truth is that when you look at these projects 2 and 3 years after they've received the subsidy, you can't find the jobs. Now, if that truth is told well and truly enough, even some of the county executives who have been the most strange about this are going to have to come to heel. There is a political process involved in this. The beneficiaries of these subsidies have tended to be active politically and in support of the people who give out the money. That's not to say the system is corrupt. I don't think that's the case. I think the system isn't working, and I think the truth that we're starting to hear from the controller, from the legislature and others is going to bring this back to heel. Look, we did this with the Empire Zone program. The same howls that you're hearing now about fixing this problem were alleged when we turned the Empire Zone program on its head. Now we're focusing on actual projects that actually create jobs, where the wage level of the jobs lets somebody support their family. That sort of makes sense. What's gone on historically before this does not make sense.
Okay, let's talk about the authority's budget office, their most recent report that came out showing the massive amounts of debt that these public authorities have been taking on. You were instrumental in creating the authority's budget office when you were in the Assembly. We shall say.
Yeah, if you go back to your introduction for this segment, you said that I tried to reform state authorities. Well, we did, and the bill that passed, the Public Authorities Reform Act, really is reining all of this stuff in, including the IDAs to some extent. So what we've done is require a very public and transparent reporting of what they're doing. We've created whistleblower programs and MWBE programs, and we've limited the kind of lobbying that can be done, and we've limited the amount of giveaways they can do. It's working. What you can say is it's working more slowly than it ought to. But we saw in the report that just came out that as the state workforce goes down, and as the state debt level goes down, state doesn't issue much more debt. Authorities issued $10 billion worth of debt last year.
And we should also, just to interrupt, we should explain what a public authority is. It's a kind of a quasi-public organization, institution that's created in order to allow these governments to borrow outside of the normal bonding process, essentially.
I think that's a fair description. And an IDA that we've just finished talking about is a public authority. It's like the MTA or the Thruway Authority or the New York Power Authority. They're not part of the state budget. They're not under anyone's real legal control, and they've become what I called Soviet-style bureaucracies. We've really changed that culture and changed that law. It's most visible on the state authorities. The MTA and the Thruway Authority, they're shaping up, and it's having a practical impact on the amount of debt, the amount of spending, the services that are being rendered. It's good stuff. It's on the IDAs and the local development corporations and the local authorities that it's been much more slow in reforming them than it should.
Let's talk about that effort.
In the end, we've got...
Let's talk about that effort on the local level, though. You're obviously no longer in the Assembly. Sam Hoyt, who was one of your partners in creating this legislation to overhaul and rein in some of these public authorities is no longer there either. Is there anybody in the legislature right now, in your view, who has kind of taken up this mantle?
Well, yeah, there are individuals who have. Jim Brennan, who was the chairman of the Committee on Corporations, done a superb job in looking at this. But I don't think there's a big secret here. I think the governor, I think the speaker, I think the majority leader of the Senate all understand that if we're going to cut back on schools, we're going to cut back on hospitals and mass transit, then these sorts of corporate subsidies have to be looked at. It's what President Obama calls corporate loopholes. In New York, they're corporate subsidies. It's the same thing. The pain has to be shared. The government has to be more efficient. We can do that by, in some ways, and sometimes reducing spending, but sometimes by figuring out which of these giveaway programs don't work. You know, if these were poor welfare mothers and the program was this inefficient, there'd be screams to stop it. Because they're large corporations and because their supporters chant the phrase job creation, they've gotten away with bloody murder. That, I think, is what the folks in the legislature and the governor's office have to bring under control. I think there's every prospect they will.
Okay, Assemblyman Richard Brodsky, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Always good to be with you.